Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers-McSwine.
Welcome to this week's National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. I am your co-host, Florence Myers-McSwine, here with your host, Mr. Lee Martin, along with our special guest this week, Mr. Kane Brolin. So again, welcome to this week's show. Lee?
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and I'm trusting that everybody is doing fine. How are you doing today, Brother Kane Brolin?
Doing fine, staying healthy, very much blessed.
Well, I'll tell you what, I truly enjoy having you as a brother and a colleague, and I just wanted to let you know that, and it's our pleasure to have you sharing with our listening and viewing audience today. And one of the first things we want to talk about is, as a certified financial planner, now what publications do you read in NFB Newsline that helps you in that profession?
Well, I happen to share with Florence a lot of joy in reading The Economist. I guess maybe joy is not always the right word, but I definitely am very informed by that. I like a lot of stuff that takes me behind the headlines to understand more about why things are happening and what trends are coming up. Certainly things like The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, a lot of the foreign publications on there, the BBC. I look at the Asia Times now and then, along with various cultural mags like some of the ones that Lee was talking about, which point to just lifestyles that may be different from mine, but I need to understand them as I understand what's going on in the lives of the people I serve and their families and their children. So it's a whole lot of different things, including what's going on in my local area. I don't subscribe to a print South Bend Tribune or a print Indy Star, but a lot of times those two publications help me a lot to understand what's going on in my local council chamber and then during the winters in the State House.
And now, Kane, what is your preferred method of accessing NFB Newsline?
Well, I'm a Braille reader from the beginning. That is not everybody's choice. Not everybody can do it or wants to do it. But a lot of times I will look at Newsline at the end of a workday when I have a little bit more time to read things the way I want and to customize what I'm reading. And so I use my iPhone in conjunction with a Braille display. Right now I'm using a Braille Note Apex that I've had for a while. I can sync those two devices up, and so I can log on to Newsline and actually read stories in there through refreshable Braille. And I find that that's great. I can do it at night when I'm with my family, but yet it doesn't look like I'm apart from them, which it would look like if I just had an earbud sticking in my ear listening to something else. I think one of the great things is I can read with my fingertips and still engage with the world at the same time. So that's how I prefer to do it.
And you can also read at nighttime with the lights off doing that as well. So
you are.
So one other thing about that that I would like to emphasize, Kane, since you mentioned the Braille display, the deaf blind can now access Newsline through basically the same technique. So it has opened itself up quite a bit. Florence, real quick, would you tell us a little bit about some of the magazines and some of the other services that the National Federation of the Blind offers?
Surely. I love reading the magazines. There's various ones. I know it seems that there are certain ones that I tend to address every week because they are my favorites. I love Guidepost Magazine. I love AARP magazine, having access to it. I love Time Magazine. Ebony Magazine is another great magazine that I enjoy reading. So it just depends on my mood as far as magazines. It's just great to have a choice. And we have at least now 100 magazines to choose from. And we, again, I love using my iPhone to access NFB Newsline. A lot of people love still using their landline phones to access the Newsline, and as well as the computer, the A-Lady, and the digital player from the Talking Book and Braille Library. So it's just great to have a choice, Lee.
Yes, and that Victor Reader stream is growing in popularity as well. And we're going to take a short pause and come back with our guest, Mr. Kane Brolin, who resides in South Bend, Indiana. So stay tuned, and we'll talk more about Mr. Kane Brolin and his professional life as well as his family. Stay tuned.
Thousands of Indiana residents feel isolated from the world due to vision problems. Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm blind. I read Stars and Stripes on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
Wow, I scored a touchdown when I found sports on NFB Newsline.
I enjoy reading TV guide listings on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind. We read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Welcome to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana. And here we are with our guest, Mr. Kane Brolin. And Kane, thank you again for being our guest this week. Last week's show, you talked a lot about your growing up being blind, as well as how your life choices basically have led you to where you are now. Now, in your opinion, how do you believe that your family relates to your being blind?
Well, my wife comes from a family that has been surprisingly open-minded all the way along. So I'm very blessed in that regard. It's funny because some families want to protect blind folks or even their blind children from experiencing life. My father-in-law was so open-minded when we first met that he had me out there in the back acreage of their property driving a garden tractor. And so I've got to say that I'm very blessed in that really I have not been treated as a lesser person ever by my wife's people because of my blindness. That cannot be said for many others. I've always been blind during the time they've known me, of course. So that contributed to this. It's not like they had to make an adjustment. They had to deal with it from the very beginning or choose not to. And unfortunately, they chose to accept me as one of them. And I will always be grateful for that. My kids have a really interesting approach. Aside from driving, I do some of mostly everything else that's required by a parent. I changed my baby's diapers. I'm loading and unloading the car when we go on a trip. I'm not driving it, but fully engaged in pretty much everything else, taking the kids out to the park, things of that nature. The main thing I've seen in my kids is they don't see blindness as a hindrance. They see it as a characteristic, and sometimes they even see it as something that they want to emulate and see what they would be able to do with it. I think all of my kids have gone through a phase where they've taken one of my long white canes and played with it and walked down the sidewalk using it as as a cane and pretending to be blind. And I don't think it's in a mocking way. It's just, I want to experience what daddy experiences. They'll take a page of Braille and run their hand over it, especially as young kids, 2, 3, 4 years old, because it's interesting to them, not because it's weird or because it's worse, just because it's different. And I think they want to understand, what is this stuff, and why is dad using it? So to me, I think it opens their mind. And so I've seen parts of their response that I never would have dreamed in a million years would have been true.
Kane, as a foster parent, you indicated that you have a Black son, and your interest and your love for your son. Let's talk about that a little bit. Your upbringing and then fostering a Black child.
I would say that other members of my family, besides myself and my wife, so older people in the family, probably had a harder time wrapping their mind around my having a Black child than about themselves having a blind son-in-law. And I don't know what that says. Maybe you could speak to that later. You and I could have an interesting discussion about that offline. But I think the comment that I heard made from the very beginning when Eli came into our home as a baby is, my goodness, he's going to have it so hard, not knowing who he is, growing up with everyone else in the family being Caucasian, which, as it turns out, we all are. And I have not found that he's had a hard time being accepted, though, especially since growing up. I've got a Black son, I've got a white son. They don't come from the same bloodlines. I'm here to tell you, they are absolutely 100% brothers. They fight like brothers. They defend each other like brothers. They tease their sisters just like two brothers would. What I do know is that Eli knows that he looks different. And when he's at the park, when he's at a swimming pool, he always wants to seek out and play with. He plays with everybody, but he is especially proud to have other friends in his school or in his play environment who are brown, as he thinks of it. And so I do have concerns for the future, except again, I want to be forward-looking and proactive about that. And more, I want to get into his life other people that are Black, African American, especially men, to be able to model who he can be, how he can express himself, and how he can feel good about looking and being the way he is, even though nobody in the family he grew up with looks quite the same way. And I'm still wrestling with, and my wife is still wrestling with how to do that the best, how to do it in a constructive way, in a way that doesn't even reflect our own hidden preconceptions or prejudices. But I think it's very important that Eli embraces his Blackness, along with his identity as a member of the Brolin family. And I've told him that he should be proud of who he is, of what he looks like, and that there are many other people out there that are a lot like he is, who have a lot of things to show him and to teach him. And so it's just a journey like everything else. How it's going to end and what exactly that's going to look like, I don't know. But I'm very proud to be his dad. He's a very smart kid and a very compassionate, loving person. And I want to be able to augment that. What I've heard from others is that folks raised in environments like mine are pretty much a lot more flexible than we think they might be. They can flip back and forth between two different cultures whenever they need to do that, and usually don't really think about it very much. And I hope that flexibility is something that he exhibits in his life going forward.
Okay. Now, you have spoken a lot, given us a lot of information about your upbringing, your family, and you're a very interesting man. Now, let's go to your profession. You are a certified financial planner.
Yes. So in that job, I wear a number of hats. I'll try to keep this piece of it rather short so that you can ask follow-up questions that you want to ask. Um, Day to day, a lot of what I do looks like what a stockbroker does. I'm licensed to sell and service stocks, bonds, mutual funds, annuities, 401k plans, 403b plans that someone might have in the workplace. And also certain types of insurance, especially life, long-term care, disability, income insurance. And I could do health insurance if I chose to. I have not entered that arena. I tend to want to work with others who do that all day long with all of the changes in that environment. But that's the essence of what I do, except in addition to that, I think where I add a lot of value to people's lives is I help them to plan for their financial futures, to look forward to the taxes they're going to pay and how to deal with it, to help them with handling debt issues, to help them figure out where their legacy is going to be passed on to later in their lives, or sometimes even during life. People want to give either to charity or to relatives. So it's not just moment to moment buying and selling stocks. A lot of it has to do with forward-looking strategies and then putting those into place year over year as I deepen the relationship with clients that I work with.
Wow, that's very interesting and intriguing. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about your professional life and your community service. So stay tuned as we talk with Mr. Kane Brolin.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I am a CFP practitioner, and I happen to be blind. I rely on NFB Newsline to keep me current with Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times.
Hoosiers can hear Indiana magazines, circulars, national magazines, and information from across the globe. Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Welcome to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana, with our guest, Mr. Kane Brolin. And Mr. Brolin, we have had some very interesting conversation. And what we like to know is you talked about being your position as a financial planner and what you do. Now, during this age of technology, as it is, how do you feel that you effectively use your technology to communicate with your clients?
Well, I write and send my own email. Obviously, a lot of things are done by phone, especially with seniors that are just more comfortable talking. In the age of COVID-19, I have a lot fewer face-to-face meetings with clients. Used to be I would meet people here in my office where we're speaking from right now. Now I have interacted via the Zoom platform through Skype and other online means. With a webcam and a microphone, you can really travel everywhere without leaving your home anymore. And I can do all that without assistance. Now, I believe that everybody who is a financial planner or a licensed broker really should have an assistant, whether they are sighted or blind. I have a wonderful one. Her name is Heidi, and she helps to put together things in a visually appealing manner. If there is something that needs to be shown on a TV screen so that my client can look at it while we're discussing or tweak some numbers, things like that, she can help to run the screen and make sure it's focused on what you can actually see. If there are forms, electronic or paper, that need a signature, obviously I'm not going to validate that. So she does many of those things in the past. My wife, who is also licensed to do this business, did serve as my assistant, not so much anymore. But I think it's important to note that it's not necessary for me as a blind guy to do everything functionally that needs to be done in a job. What I do need to do, though, is to figure out if I'm not going to do a specific part of it, who is? Because the client should not note a difference. Whether I'm blind, whether I'm not, doesn't really matter to them. What they want to do is they want to see results, and they want to know that someone is out there who can take care of them, especially in a moment's notice when something comes up and there's money that has to be moved somewhere. So I've tried to use that as a selling point. The fact that, you know what, I don't have to prove how I can create a PowerPoint presentation, but if there's one that needs to be done, you have to know that I'm going to stand and deliver and have it ready by the time it's needed somehow.
Well, Kane, that's a big task that you're taking on, and I really appreciate that answer there. Now, what has shaped the value and skills that you bring to your professional life and community service?
Well, you know, I've always been a little disappointed that I didn't have a full-blown media career. But I think that the skills that I learned when I was studying to be a broadcast journalism have been brought to bear on what I do now. I am not a particularly great numbers guy. I don't spend all day long manipulating spreadsheets. I do have to understand what numbers mean, though. I've got to know what information sources to trust, and I have to be able to do research and communicate my value and my recommendations to ordinary people who don't do my business in a way that makes them encouraged to take my advice and make it work for themselves. So I really still see myself as more a communications guy than anything else. And the fact that I'm not afraid to do research, the fact that I use technology to go out and get information and ask the right questions, and to be able to deliver those answers in a way that my clients can actually remember them when they leave the office or when they log off of a Zoom meeting. That is where the rubber meets the road, and that's where I believe that my strengths lie. And you can be blind and do that just fine. There are some who actually think that blind people are better communicators and better writers than sighted people are, because we have to use words to do so many things, and we really have to get it right.
What advice would you give to someone who were considering a career in financial planning?
Get someone to sponsor you in the business. I did not do that. I was not able to do it. I started in the business in this area right after I moved here and really didn't know anybody. So learn how to market yourself. Even from being a kid, know how to network. That's another thing I never learned to do. But a lot of what really is very important is knowing how to interact with people, knowing who can stand in your corner and make life work for you, and who's going to back you up if you should ever have a problem. Hugely important.
Are there many blind colleagues that's in this profession?
There are a few. I've known a couple of them from the past. I've not known them super well. I think the other two that I have known that were financial planners are out on the East Coast. Yeah, there are some. You can do it, and there are more. I think this is the type of business that we are very well suited for. You can go to college and get a degree in financial planning now, which was not the case when I first started. And there are ways you can take tests, many, many tests that always have to be taken for continuing education and things. So I think there are certainly not enough. If you were to ask that question and I had to answer in 5 words or less, I would say yes, but not enough. There need to be more, and there can be more.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to take us a conclusion break here, and we're going to come back and conclude our show with Mr. Kane Brolin. And I just want to tell you, this has been a great educational and a great experience for us as well. And I'm sure our listeners and viewing audience would enjoy this. So stay tuned, and we'll come back with the conclusion of our NFB Newsline Indiana.
Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
Wow, I scored a touchdown when I found sports on NFB Newsline.
I enjoy reading TV guide listings on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind. We read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
Welcome to the conclusion of today's show. We've had a very good show with Mr. Brolin and Kane. What advice would you like to give, or what message would you like to share with our viewing and listening audience?
That I'm available to help. There are probably a lot of questions that individual people might have, which I can't answer here. I encourage anybody that wants to know about any of this stuff, including how the blind can work in financial services, to give me a call. And for those who can't see the screen, my phone number is 574-254-7180. And I can also answer a lot of questions specific to the financial planning side of special needs and the things that families go through when they have kids or adults in them that have disabilities. So I do encourage people to reach out.
Well, we just want to thank you once again, Mr. Kane, Brolin, for coming on to our show. And once again, he exhibits that blindness is not what defines you, and you can live the life you want. Thank you, and join us next week on a brand new show. Take good care.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.